Well, why don't we go ahead and jump in? And if people trickle in, they trickle in. My name is Whitney Ziegler. I'm the founder of Big Rocks Organizing. We're a professional organizing and right sizing specialty company based out of Beaverton, Oregon. And thank you for being here. This is the second part in our series. It's called Right Sizing from the Inside Out. And last month, if you missed it, it is recorded and available on our website. If you want to go back and watch, we talked about our needs and our values and about setting our compass and our direction for 2021. And this month, we're talking about Artful Boundaries with Dr. Katherine, who's here today with us as our special guest. And I would like to officially introduce her. Unless, Dr. Katherine, do you want to do quick introductions to meet everybody first? Or what would you like to see happen? This is a pretty flexible, interactive space.
Oh, whatever. I'm cool either way. Yeah, we can just start, I guess. I don't know.
Okay, let me do your official bio. How about that? Okay, Dr. Katherine Hoffman is a naturopathic physician specializing in mental health. In her work with patients and clients, she noticed one common root of anxiety, depression, and relationship problems and burnout, the inability to just say no. For this reason, she now exclusively supports women who are ready to stop sacrificing themselves on the altar of yes and people-pleasing, helping them to get as comfy with no as they are curled up next to the fire with a great book and a scented candle. She lives in Portland, Oregon, where she keeps 6 chickens and is training for the 2021 Portland Marathon.
Thanks.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much for being here. And I'll just make a side note that Dr. Katherine also works with people who identify as male or non-binary. So,
yeah, I only say that because it so happens that most of my practice, the people who tend to find me and resonate are women, but I'm not exclusive in any way. And of course, all the information that I have applies to both genders, and it just is it's a people thing. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure. A couple of you have heard pretty close to this talk. I know Whitney and Gina and Bill all have heard something pretty similar to this. So I apologize for that. And hopefully there are some new things that if you have heard this before, you can take away some new nuggets. I'm curious before I get started though, when you all think of boundaries, what comes up? Like, what are the feelings that come up? And in maybe different contexts evoke different feelings, but I'm just curious to hear from you all so I can make this a little bit more personalized and relevant to where you all are at. Yeah. Jump in, Larry.
So for me, it's anxiety because you've got to tell somebody no. You've got to draw a line, and you've got to say no. I can't do that. I can't help you with that. So just the anxiety of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For me, it represents safety. I feel like they keep me safe. The more firm they are, the more I can kind of relax and focus and feel safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And Gina says that resonates as well with her. Yeah, Bill, is your hand up? Sorry.
I was just going to say, yeah, personally, professionally, just make sure that I am respectful of not only others' boundaries, but also my own. That I set my own and make sure I adhere to them.
Yeah. Yeah, Terry.
For me, it's really been a journey, especially since my divorce, is to really figure out, what I wanted for myself. Mm-hmm. And I've always been a people pleaser. So I've learned that I have to be careful to protect myself. So I don't burn out and do everything what other people want me to do and do things for myself.
Yeah. People pleaser is a word I hear often. For sure. Any other thoughts before I forge on ahead?
I'm sorry, I had a hard time figuring out how to get logged on, but what was the question?
Yeah, so welcome in. I was just asking folks, when you think of boundaries, what comes up? Like, are there specific emotions that come up? Maybe it's different in different contexts, but anything you associate when you hear that word.
I find in my house, they tend to, when I set a boundary, they try to say, oh, really? And then they try to push it. And then it becomes World War III.
Yeah. Mhm. Whitney, I saw your hand up too.
For me, I think the word hard comes to mind. I think it's something that I struggle with because I want to be able to help people and I don't want to let people down.
Mhm.
And I kind of feel like the universe has me here in this lifetime to keep, like, this is like the thing that I keep coming back to and keep getting the ability to practice. It's boundaries, boundaries, boundaries.
Yeah,
So
for
glad
sure.
to have you here today.
Yeah, boundaries are super interesting with a teenager. I get that. And some sense, and Brian is saying that he also feels empowered, and being able to stay on your own path. Yeah, these are all really good and super normal, right? There's no response that I have not heard at least twice or 3 times or many more times before coming in here. So awesome. You all are on a great track already and you don't even need me. And so before I get started again, I wanted to make sure to be clear, like, this is a really big topic, and I recognize and I'm sensitive to the fact that it can be super charged and super challenging, and there's a lot wrapped up in why we are unable to set boundaries, or maybe why we set too many boundaries. And folks tend towards like not setting good boundaries, but I do know that it can go the other way as well, because it's a protective mechanism. And so honestly, we could spend weeks and weeks and weeks talking about this. And I have a mastermind that I'm launching in March for this exact reason. Like, it's a super intense thing to work through, and I want to support folks in doing that. But in the time we have today, it's going to be pretty abbreviated and sort of high level, like just sort of how to approach it. And what I'm really hoping that you all walk away with are a couple things. One, if nothing else, is a reframe of how you can consider your boundaries. And then beyond that, I am going to provide a couple of strategies so that you can approach boundaries in a way that feels aligned with your integrity. And if you have questions as I go, feel free to jump in along the way. I have about 20 minutes of material, and I'm happy to talk and have more conversation. But I find that I was toying with, like, do I just want to do a discussion thing? But I think having the material sort of gives us a place to hang our hat and stay organized a little bit. So with that said, I'll just go ahead and get started. And so, like you all have said, boundaries are tough because we don't want to hurt folks' feelings. If you say no, you think that you're going to be perceived as mean, or not meeting your obligations or responsibilities. You can be afraid of not getting another fill in the blank. From professionals, I hear a lot like, oh, I'm afraid if I say no, I'm never going to get another client. Or if I say no, this friend is never going to ask me for anything again. They're not going to trust me with anything else ever again. So that fear of missing out is really real when it comes to boundary setting. There can be guilt also around putting yourself first. I find this to be especially true with families, and especially true in families where the parents have immigrated to the United States from another country, and there's that cultural clash that happens. And then there can be, that pushy feeling that Jennifer mentioned about, like, you want to say no, and maybe in fact you do say no, but that gets bounced back to you, and it becomes a whole big issue because people aren't willing to respect the fact that you have laid down a line and kept that. So it's tough. There's a lot of reasons why it's tough. And you all have also identified something super important, which is that if you're able to set really good boundaries, a really magical thing happens, which is that you realize that you can in fact trust yourself to keep yourself safe. You can trust yourself to set up space so that you can live life in the way that you want to live it. And the way that I frame boundaries is that, to help take away this charge, is that they really are simply and only a container for meaningful interaction. That's all you're doing when you're setting artful boundaries, is you're really building a space where you can exist and the folks around you can exist with mutual respect and care. And so that, like I said, allows you to reclaim some agency and autonomy. And then as you go, like I said, you're going to learn more and more that you can trust yourself. The other thing that happens is that other people recognize that you are trustworthy. Because I don't know, I have been guilty of this, and I have had other folks do this to me where I will just say yes because I don't want to say no, and I'm afraid to say no. And I realize after the fact, oh shoot, I really don't have the time to devote to this. And so what I deliver back, whether that's spending time with someone or like a deliverable professionally, what I end up providing is it's not great. I don't feel good about it. They don't feel good about it. And everyone's kind of let down. And so as you're able to say no and hold that line, other people start to see like, oh yeah, I can actually trust you with this question. And I can trust you that if you cannot commit, you will actually turn me down. That's a very emotionally mature response, hopefully, that folks have. Sometimes that doesn't happen, but by and large, I see that that's the case for most folks. Emotionally speaking, when you're not setting healthy boundaries and you're maybe in a place of stress or overwhelm or anxiety, someone identified as an issue around boundaries, what your body is doing in these moments is it's essentially thinking that it is about to die, right? Our stress response and our anxiety system is built into our bodies so that we can get out of situations that are not safe for us. When this happens, when our bodies kind of shut down and are in this fight or flight mode, they don't shut down, they shift activities. But what happens is that your frontal cortex, right, this is this part of the brain that does all of your higher level logical problem solving thinking. When you're in a state of stress, this part of the brain does not work. Like physiologically, you cannot access all the powers of the frontal part of your brain, which means that your ability to solve problems effectively, your ability to deal with those stressors that are even more because you haven't said no to them, your ability to deal with all of those things is tremendously diminished, right? You're not able to do that creative thinking and logical thinking and get to the end of it. And so for folks who struggle with boundaries, this ends up becoming a vicious cycle because they've said yes, they get stressed out, they can't show up for what they need to show up for, they say yes, and it just keeps going and going and going. And so as you start to set boundaries, there are a lot of things will happen. One is that your body's going to come into balance naturally and on its own. Many people, most people, I've not talked to anyone in my clinical practice who is not tired or anxious. It's just everyone has this. Being able to set boundaries is one of the best low intervention ways I know to help folks cope with this and have those feelings start to relieve and lift away. The other emotions that start to shift through this, one is anger. And I'm always and forever talking about anger. It is counterintuitively one of my favorite emotions. And I will tell you, it is because anger is the emotion that tells you very quickly and very intensively up front, hey, there's a line that's been crossed and I am not safe. It gets a little bit gendered because our culture treats folks who identify as women and folks who identify as men differently as of right now. And folks who identify as female are taught that we are supposed to be nice. We are supposed to take what comes our way with a smile and provide service to everyone else and disregard ourselves in many ways. And so this is part of the reason I emphasize with women specifically, but certainly this shows up in both genders and can show up in both genders. And certainly we all experience the entire range of emotions. And so I encourage you to pay specific and special attention to what is going on when I get angry. What is happening around me when that anger flares up? We all have moments that we wish we didn't, where we go from 0 to 60 in like half a second or less. And so paying, obviously in the moment, like you're not going to be able to do thinking, but as that moment passes and as the situation resolves, sitting down and thinking through like, what about that was unsafe for me? What about that called to the fact that there's a line that was crossed? Sometimes it's super evident, right? Sometimes it's like there's an abusive situation and someone says something they shouldn't have done, and it's like, oh, that's super clear, that's what's going on. Sometimes it's a little bit more subtle. Sometimes it's a commitment that maybe you made to yourself that you broke, and then you were angry and irritable and you're like, I don't know why this is happening. But if you sit down and reflect on that, you can come to, oh, right, I meant to do this thing and I broke my word to myself. So that's the first piece there. Also, anxiety is going to go down, which we already talked about. Energy is going to go up over time for that same reason. You're sort of draining your own energy stores as you're going if you're not able to set good boundaries. And so that is super draining because you're giving and giving and giving, and you're not making that space and holding that container for yourself to really tend your own energy stores. Resilience will start to go up for all the reasons that we've already talked through. And then trust, we also talked about this, both the inner, like the inside intrapersonal and then interpersonally relationship wise. So that brings us into, firstly, before I move on, are there any questions or comments up to this point? No? Okay, I'll just carry on. So then the next question becomes, how do you actually set an artful boundary? Before I get into that, I want to clarify, I use this term artful boundary really specifically because boundaries are a buzzword right now. They're super like tossed around, and everybody's talking about boundaries as a form of self-care, which is wonderful. And also, it's really important for me to emphasize that, yeah, for sure, that it is really disappointing to not achieve the boundaries you set off of the chat. I'm just reading. It's really important for me to emphasize the fact that your boundaries are not just for you. They are for you, and they're also for everyone else around you. Because as you're able to build that space for yourself and make a container where you feel safe to talk to someone, where you feel safe to have a really meaningful conversation, or to complete a project and feel good about the work that you're doing, or to have family dinner with the teenagers, as challenging as that might be, in all these different situations, as you build that space, what happens is that everyone in that constellation of that interaction comes to know themselves as honorable and worthy. And so that's why I use this term artful boundary, because it kind of sets apart. I'm not just talking about turning notifications off your phone. I'm also talking about that. And there's more to it than just that. So, oh, and the other thing I want to bring up is that it looks different for everyone. So I'm providing a super simplified, super condensed down system here. And, I did a talk yesterday, like I said, and somebody brought up like, oh, they won't necessarily say anything, but they have some strategies where they will sort of non-verbally set a line with someone and sort of redirect folks. And so sometimes that's what you need to do. Sometimes you gotta sit down and have a really challenging conversation. And sometimes it's a matter of, you know what, I'm just gonna put my phone on do not disturb, and sorry I didn't take your call, my phone never rang, my bad. And so it's gonna look different, and everything in between, of course. And so take this all with a grain of salt, and certainly think through as I'm talking, like where might this fit in my life? Are there contexts where I'm already really good at boundaries? Invariably, as I'm talking with folks, they're like, oh, I'm really bad at setting boundaries. I'm like, okay, well, what about at this place? Like, are you really bad at boundaries at home? Yeah, it's the worst. Like, I'm really bad with my kids. Okay. Are you really bad at setting boundaries at work? Well, actually, I'm pretty good with my coworkers. Like, I do really well telling them they need to buzz off, but, not so good with my boss. Okay, great. Like, you're really good at setting boundaries with your coworkers. You have this skill in one context. It's transferable. It's going to be challenging because the dynamics are different, but you already have a place where you can start. You already have that foothold. So keep that in mind as well as we're talking through. And I'm walking through 2 steps today. The first, well, I delineate them falsely. That's the other thing I wanted to, there's a lot of caveats throughout this, but it sounds like it's really easy for me to say like there's step 1 and there's step 2, but we're all dancing in these different spaces all the time. It's not like you do 1 and then you do 2 and then you're done. Usually it's you do 1, you do that again, you do that again, you do 2, it doesn't take, you got to say it again, and maybe you go back to like your first step and redo it. So it's not just a linear process here. The first step is setting expectations. And this is something that we do already in a lot of places. We don't necessarily think about it or call it that. So my favorite example of expectation setting in the COVID Zoom world is if you've ever set up a Zoom meeting with someone, that is an experience of setting expectations with the other person. You schedule a time that's agreeable. You know, you're going to be on Zoom. If you use an automated calendar scheduling app or something, you probably have it set to like 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever time is needed. And so already throughout that process, you and the other person have set expectations together. Okay, this is going to be a half-hour conversation. What should be included in this conversation? Maybe you're not consciously thinking about it, but this is the thought process that happens. If you've ever had like a family dinner time, this is another really good example. We do this at our house where it's family dinners every night at 6:30. You got to be there. Like this, it is what it is. And we expect everyone at the table and ready to go at that time. So that's an example of sort of a personal expectation setting. It can also show up in professionally. I really love the book Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. He talks a lot about this. He doesn't call it this necessarily, but I sort of have lifted a lot of his ideas out of there because I think they're great. But having in your email signature, like, hey, I check emails these days at this time. So, you know, I check my emails every day at 12:30. So the other person might get that and they've emailed you at like 6 p.m. Okay, well, they're not going to hear back from you tonight, obviously. Having office hours where you're just open to take calls. I know for me, I have I get a lot of sales calls from reps from supplement companies, and they'll say like, oh, do you have a sec? And I'm like, well, what is a sec? I don't know what that means. Like, how long is this actually going to take? And as soon as I ask that, they're usually like, oh yeah, I have like 4 questions. It'll take about 5 minutes. I'm like, okay, yeah, I can give 5 minutes. Or not, or I'm like, no, just send me an email. I don't want to talk to you. Get off the phone. So it's sort of an in the moment way of clarifying because they have not set their expectations with me and I need to know because my time is valuable. So asking those questions is sort of a reverse expectation setting, if you will. Making sure that you have an outgoing voicemail that is really clear about when you're checking messages. Having something like, hey, thanks for calling. I check my voicemail messages every day at 11 a.m. Right. So if someone calls you at 12:30, oh darn, they just missed you, but you'll get them the next day. And that just helps, I find, in our culture that moves really fast. Having these kinds of basic processes in place is super helpful because it kind of gives everybody permission to slow down and chill out a little bit. Like, it's okay. Like, I didn't go away. I'm not responding to your email within the 2 seconds that you sent it, but I'm here and I promise that I will get to it in a reasonable time. And then if you're someone who's in business for yourself, or even if you're not, if you're doing proposals or business contracts, new client contracts, operating agreements, all of these different things are also ways of setting expectations. And I'll give you another example. In my own client paperwork, I have a page that says what my clients can expect from me. And I have it delineated bullet point by bullet point so they can see and read like, oh, okay, I know when I'm working with Katherine, this is what she's going to bring to the table every time without fail. And they can call me on it if something happens and they're like, hey, you didn't do this today. I'm like, yeah, you're right. I'm really sorry about that. Like, how can I make it up to you? Or like making sure that we're adjusting as we go. So that's the first piece. And of course, there's no explicit no in there, right? You haven't actually told someone like, no, I can't do that for you. But you're setting the stage and you're putting that foundation in that container so that you can have those meaningful interactions moving forward. The second piece I recommend to folks is having a formula. I love stock phrases for folks. The other thing that invariably I see show up is that folks have like 1 or 2 situations that they struggle so hard to set good boundaries. And they can say like, oh man, I really wish I had said this thing. I'm like, okay, well, how would you say that thing? Is that how you want to say it? What would feel best to you? What would be most aligned with your integrity? And so talking through that can be super helpful. And even doing this with like a friend or a colleague or a family member, if something comes up and you're like, gosh, I wish I had handled this a little bit differently, game it out. And if you hit on languaging that you like, practice it. Literally stand in front of the mirror and practice it. You can record yourself saying it, see how it sounds to you, practice. And you know, that as you do this, what will happen is that you'll lay down those tracks in your brain, and when you need it, it'll be there for you and it'll fall out of your mouth and situation fixed. Maybe, hopefully. but it's a lot less stressful than trying to search for the words in the moment that you're not finding. But the formula I give folks if they're struggling to come up with languaging is positive aspect of the situation plus no in one form or another, plus some alternative if you want to offer that to folks. So, you know, I give this example all the time, and I apologize for everyone who has heard it before. But this is common for folks who are entrepreneur types. If you have a client who agrees to a proposal and then they come back and they want an extra 20 hours of work in addition to what you already have agreed to, this is a place where a lot of folks struggle and they don't know how to be like, no, I can't really do this for you. Some folks have a really easy time here, but a lot of folks don't. And so being super honest about like, hey, I see you're super passionate about this project. I really want to make sure you get what you need, right? That's your positive aspect. And then in this example, I've bundled the second two pieces of this formula. So I have, I can accommodate this request after I send over an updated proposal, or I can go ahead and finish what we agreed to. What's your preference? So the word no does not exist in this little mini paragraph. And that's the implication, like, no, I'm not doing that for you. Here's what I can do instead. And so you're providing that alternative. Another thing that comes up is like, yeah, I get that, but then some people are really pushy and they don't want to honor that, and they're going to want to like just get what they want regardless of what I say. And yes, that is absolutely true, and that absolutely happens. And to that, I say this is why stock phrases are super important. I give this example a lot of a family member, and this often comes up in families in a really big way, where you want to change a dynamic and it's not changing because the other person is being really pushy. And so having the same sentence and just saying it again, okay, and then just saying it again and until that person is able to finally hear it. When our dynamics are super close with folks and something starts to shift, it feels really destabilizing and it makes the other person feel super insecure about where they stand. And so the best thing that you can do is not react to that, but just continue to say, yep, I hear you, and this is what it is. And I'll just wrap up with this. I had a family member that this happened to me with, and I said, you know what, if you continue to be this way with me, our relationship is going to change. And my family member went off the rails. It was one of their 0 to 60 moments in less than 5 seconds. And I got accusations back and like, how dare you? And you're threatening me and you're going to leave me and abandon me and like everything you can imagine. And I said, okay, that's fine. I hear you. That's not what's happening. In fact, our relationship is not going to, our like labeled relationship is not going to change, but the quality of our relationship is what will change if you do not change your behaviors. And so I said that a few times, like we repeated this cycle, and then eventually they were able to calm down and say, oh, wait, so what you're saying is that I just need to not say this thing to you. I said, yeah, that's right. That's exactly it. And they're like, oh yeah, I can do that. That's not a problem. But it takes some time to get those tracks laid in and to help the other person just sort of, no, I'm here. I'm just shifting things a little bit. Yeah, so that's all the information that I had to run through there. Questions, comments, concerns, sticky spots that have not been addressed? Yeah, go ahead.
So I actually got a privilege of starting to read a book called Boundaries. Mm-hmm. And come to find out, they also have it for teens, for marriage, for dating. Mm-hmm. It's pretty cool. But when I read that, the basic boundaries, one of the first sentences in the book was like, bam, for me, because it talks about the basic boundaries that we learn as babies.
Yes.
How skin is, I'm separate from the world, and how that basic boundary could be broken. Mm-hmm. And that was like for me, that was an eye-opener of why boundaries can become so challenging, is if that basic boundary has been crossed, Now you don't know where you begin and where everybody else ends, or, you know, or the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's childhood is rough, man. It's lovely for a lot of reasons, and it's interesting. I was doing the coming up with the curriculum for the mastermind that's coming up, and I was thinking through, like, gosh, you can't talk about boundaries without talking about family dynamics when you were growing up, because it so informs everything else moving forward. And how your parents were able to support you or not, how they were, whether or not they had good boundaries or whether they had no boundaries. Folks with family members who are have a narcissistic, either full-blown like narcissistic personality disorder or narcissistic tendencies without having the full-blown diagnosable condition. Also, bipolar can be one, and then what's the other one I'm thinking of that the name is not
Trauma
coming
as
to me?
well.
Yeah, definitely trauma.
Indecent, we'll call it indecent traumas.
Yeah, all of that.
That one's a big one.
Yeah.
And I find that as an adult with kids, I find that boundary has bled down into my kids, or I should say lack of boundary. And so in turn, now the kids don't understand what boundary means.
Yeah.
And then it gets reflected in personal space.
And it's really important to have grace for yourself and compassion for yourself, and for the folks around you, because I think there's a lot of shame and blame piled up about, like, oh, I'm really bad at setting boundaries. And the fact of the matter is that you have, all of us, not just you, I'm speaking to like the world in general, we all have developed ways of being that have kept us safe and have gotten us to where we are currently. And I'm always really intentional about honoring that with folks, about, like, you're not a bad person because of where you're at. You're actually really good at surviving, and that's okay. And at a certain point, you realize, oh, maybe the strategy isn't so helpful anymore. And so that's when you can start to try and make some changes.
Brené Brown is really good for helping with the shame factor.
Yeah, she has some great stuff.
Anyone have questions for Dr. Katherine, or comments, reflections?
When I'm retired now, but when I was working, I had a boss who was somewhat of a bully. And I remember I was at the front desk, and she was like leaning over me for something. I can't remember what it was. And I did say to her that I felt like she was in my space. And her response to me was, "No, I'm not in your space." What do you say to somebody like that? I can't. It wasn't very pretty.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Casey. I think that's a moment where being really clear in no uncertain terms and saying, I really need you to step back. I'm uncomfortable. So whether or not you're perceiving that you're in my space, that's how I'm feeling. So please move. And if they don't move, then I would recommend that someone get up and move themselves. Like, okay, I'm going to take a break until this whole mess passes, and then maybe we can explore this at another moment. But yeah, those are the moments where you've got to be like, I don't care what you think. This is what I think, and in this instance, that's what matters. So back off.
And that's going to probably be very useful now if somebody gets too close with this COVID thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'm also always really amazed that when I notice someone starts to like push at one of my boundaries in a small way that seems like quote unquote insignificant, all of a sudden, like, it's like a dam opens, and all of a sudden they're pushing all my boundaries, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I should have just stuck to that initial little bit, like even though it seems so little, like that was like the first sign that this person doesn't really work well with boundaries. And something that took me so long to learn to like have compassion is if someone doesn't respond well to my boundaries, it's because they probably don't have any of their own. And so kind of, I really love what you were saying is like the boundaries aren't just for us, they're for other people too. And you can kind of make other people feel safe too. And I've never even thought about it that way, but it's so true.
Yeah. And it's important to remember that even if like a lot of folks do have trouble with boundaries, and sometimes it's just a perception thing. I don't think that's what you're describing, Devin, but I know that there are moments where I'm like, this bugs me. And the other person's like, well, why? That's weird. I'm like, yeah, I can see why you would think that, but I need you to not. And I think I'm someone who identifies as a highly sensitive person. I'm very like empathetic and empathic for folks. And it's like, I don't need you to get it. I just need you to honor it. That can be a really helpful phrase also. Like, I don't need you to understand. I just need you to do what I'm asking. But yeah, the little stuff leads to the big stuff.
I love that.
Yeah,
I know one thing I really liked that you said was about the stock phrases for pushing people. That's been an issue for me. I tend to get defensive. Yeah. I feel like people are pushing me to do something. Yeah. And sometimes I just don't know what to do and I'll say the wrong thing. So it's great to, have stock phrases so you're not putting yourself in a bad position.
Yeah. It's those moments, man. Those are the golden learning moments I think we're given in our lives. Like when it's just someone keeps coming and it happens so fast. And you're like, oh man. And the other advice that I would give there is even if you don't have a stock phrase and you're not sure what to say, but like that defensiveness is happening, saying, you know what, I'm getting a little bit defensive and like, this isn't going to go very well for either one of us. I'm going to take a time out. And I can't tell you how much folks appreciate that and how many folks are knocked off their socks by the fact that you're able to articulate that and like act in a way that's super responsible.
I love that. That's a great way to put it. You do tend to say things sometimes that you regret later when you really have time to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, what's up, Bill?
I'm going to draw a parallel with the work that I do with caregivers. I won't get into the details of why. I think most people know that sometimes due to certain behaviors, whether they can control them or not, that sometimes it's better don't react at all.
Yeah.
Or in other words, one of the phrases from our classes we gave was don't just stand there, do nothing. But also knowing that those behaviors may be coming, especially if you know this person well, have ready-made responses. Just like you're saying with stock phrases, what are you going to say when they act or say or don't do what you want them to do?
Yeah.
Right. It could actually be a simple thing like repeated questions.
Yeah. Yeah, and it feels so ridiculous. I'm literally pounding my head against a wall, like just thunk, thunk, thunk. Like, why is this not sinking in? And I know, Bill, the work that you do is very specific, but in the general population, it can still just feel like, why is this not working still? It's like, I've made the joke like, okay, it's the third time saying, maybe it'll stick. Okay, it's like the 55th time saying this, maybe it'll stick. Maybe number 262, like maybe it'll finally stick. But in some cases, it really just does take that. It's kind of like turn off the emotional part and be like, this is happening. And all right, like I'm not letting down, but.
Or actually walk away.
Yeah.
When you change your behavior, we'll come back. Yeah.
Yes.
And for the obvious reasons, I used to have to do that with my mom.
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
Which she couldn't help.
Yeah, for teens also, like not just for elder folks. Casey's
because like, what does that behavior sound like?
Say what?
2-year-old in some cases.
It's like,
What's even more fun is teens with disabilities that don't understand, you know, they want to, when they get in their attack mode, you know, they don't have that prefrontal working anyway, but
yeah.
they get into attack mode, and I was thinking about that catchphrase you were saying, you know, you don't have to understand it, you just I just need you to honor it.
Yeah.
I was thinking, because with my kids, I got to thinking, but they'll push back on that. And then I thought, wait, that word honor doesn't say I need you to do it.
Mhm.
It's because I'm an adult, it's I need you to honor it. There's no response or return to honoring it.
Mhm.
And getting them to understand they don't need to know why I need them to do something or why I need them to stop doing something.
Mhm.
They just need to honor the fact that it's been requested of them,
Mhm. Yeah.
even knowing that as the teenager they're still not going to do it.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, one place where I really have trouble setting boundaries, especially with a couple of friends of mine, is on phone calls. I have a couple of people that I don't know how to tell them, you know, I don't want to be on the phone with you for an hour, or to set some reasonable expectations. I've gotten much better when when I want to leave, I finally can just say I need to leave. I've gotten better at doing that without any guilt,
Yeah.
but I don't know whether I just need to do that sooner or if there might be a way to set some expectations. I've thought at times of calling them when I know I have to be somewhere at a certain time so that I will make sure I get off the phone.
Mhm.
But any thoughts any good stock phrases about setting expectations with length of phone calls?
Yeah. I think saying exactly what you just said, like, hey, this feels really awkward to say because I'm not used to saying it, but I only have about 15 minutes right now. Is that okay? And seeing what they come back with. And then when it gets closer to the time, or maybe don't even ask if it's okay, saying like, hey, this feels really weird to say, but I only have about 15 minutes right now. Happy to talk to you though. And then as it gets to that time, like, okay, like I have to go now. It's been that 15 minutes. If folks, because I also have that experience of people kind of like, all right, let's wrap this up here. And just saying like, yeah, I gotta go now. It's been so nice talking to you. Can't wait to chat again or whatever it might be.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
That's the other thing that I didn't mention here, but saying that it feels weird is super helpful to diffuse some of these situations, especially if you're not used to saying that. And again, it's one of those things like saying like, hey, I don't think this is going to go well for either one of us. I need to take a time out and like, let's come back to this later. It's kind of the same thing. And being just super transparent with folks like, hey, it feels really, really weird because I'm really not used to doing this. And it might feel weird for you to hear, but this is where it's at. Is that helpful, Mary?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it might work better for me if I start maybe initiating the phone calls and saying, just wanted to check in with, you know,
Yeah.
I just want to check. I only have a few minutes, but I just wanted to check in with you. So,
Yeah.
you know, I'll need to be off the phone in 15 minutes or something, but just wanted to check in, see how you are. Maybe
That's
if I
good.
do that more often, I won't get these long phone calls.
Yeah. Yeah.
For those of us who maybe grew up in a household where there weren't a lot of boundaries, or maybe there was addiction or alcoholism, do you have any, I don't know, any tips or any insights to share around that?
Oh boy.
Sorry, it might be a really big topic. You don't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah, that's really big. In terms of like, continuing relationships with family members as an adult now, or like patterns that you're seeing yourself replicate, or
Maybe, I guess, just for folks who didn't have healthy boundaries modeled as they were growing up, like where's a good place to start?
small. Start small. And I think a lot of this work comes down to reflecting and thinking like what would make me feel safe here? What would I what about this situation would make it enjoyable? Where in this space, or like what would need to happen in order for me to feel like I can just be myself? And thinking those questions through can provide some really good insight about what boundaries you need specifically, because we all don't need the same thing. We all need different things. And so if you're able to reflect and pinpoint like, okay, I really need a day to myself. That just is what would make me feel like I can show up as myself and as like am able to support folks and be present. That's a great place to start. And maybe you can't start with a day, but maybe an hour, right? Like I get an hour on Saturday morning and don't bug me. Like I'm going for a walk. I'm going to like pick up my whatever, like my coffee and go to the park or like whatever that might look like. I think that's a really nice place to start because you will begin to lay down some positive associations with, oh, if I set this time for myself, I start to feel better, or I continue to feel better, like improve my sense of myself in the world. And so that would be one place. And also paying attention to anger. Like that's honest to God, if nothing else is taken away, like being able to be really clear about one, when you're even getting angry, because some folks, especially if you've been in a place where those boundaries don't exist, like you're not allowed to be angry because your feelings don't matter. And so being super clear about like, oh, I think I'm angry about that. Like, okay. And that can sometimes even be the very first baby step. And then as you follow that thread, it'll take you sort of to the center of, okay, this is what's going on. Like, I really don't like that this person is taking advantage of my time, or I don't like that, I'm not honoring my commitment to my health and like going to bed at 1 a.m. every night. Not you specifically, but just as general examples. I don't know what's going on for you, Whitney. But following that thread can be super helpful and help you unravel a lot of the stuff that might be in there. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Question about being around controlling people.
Yeah.
Set boundaries with that, because that's really hard when you're in a relationship with somebody who likes to control everything. And I never did figure out how to set boundaries that worked with that.
Yeah. So this is a tough one, I think, especially for romantic relationships, because it can be difficult sometimes. And I'm just going to say this because it happens and it feels weird to say, but it's hard sometimes to differentiate, like, is this an abusive situation I need to get out of? Or is this just someone who is sort of a control freak and like just wants things done their way? Because those are different situations, but they can look very similar. And so that would be my first caveat. And the second part is getting curious. Like, when I was in med school, my anxiety was like through the roof. And my poor husband was like, I don't know what is wrong with you, but you are nuts. Like something needs to move here. And that's how it comes out. That's how my anxiety manifests, that I need everything to be a very specific way. And it is not okay if it's not. And if it's not okay, like I'm out, I will freak out. Nobody's happy. It's not good. And so getting curious about like, hey, what is this about? Like, why, if you're able to have a frank conversation with the other person and saying like, why do you need this done in this specific way? Or why is it so important that the books have to be lined up just so? Or why does it matter, like, if the oatmeal goes on the top shelf as opposed to the bottom shelf? Like, what's going on? And getting curious can be helpful and provide some insight about like, okay, maybe it is just anxiety, or maybe it's, something else going on. The other piece is figuring out like, where are the places where you need autonomy, where you just need to be able to exist and be and not get blowback from, maybe you put we don't have CDs anymore, but like maybe you put a CD in the wrong place, or a DVD or something, or like took something off the shelf and it got put back somewhere different, or whatever it happens to be. Where are the places where you just need to exist? And kind of starting to push out and be like, yeah, I hear you. And this is my space and this is my time. So no, that's not going to work for me. Would be the other piece that I would give there.
I think we have time for about one more question. Dr. Katherine, could you tell us a little bit about your mastermind that's coming up in March?
Yeah, I'm really excited about it since I sat down and did the curriculum outline today, and I'm super stoked. So what we're going to be doing is it's not a therapy group. It's not like a support group, although there are elements of that. But what we're going to be doing is walking through sort of the foundations of why boundaries are tough and unpacking all of the emotional stuff that we've really just touched the surface on here today. And figuring out like, okay, what's wrapped up in that big ball of like, oh, I don't want to say this. And then learning how to say it. And so there's going to be an alternating, every other week will be like group meetings, and two people will have opportunity to like have the floor, get feedback from folks, bounce ideas, whatever that is. And then the other weeks are going to be educational content. So I'm going to be putting together about hour-long videos for folks to listen to and watch and glean information from. And then of course there'll be a workbook to go along with that, because I'm all about the reflective questions. And so you need a space to sort of think through those things and write them down and or reference them in whatever way makes the most sense for participants. And the groups are going to be super small. I'm limiting it to, I think, people per group, so that I want everybody to feel safe to be vulnerable, because it can get super tough and super intense. And so certainly confidentiality and all that will be a part of that as well. Yeah, Jennifer. Yeah.
Hi. So I have a quick question.
Mhm.
I am a house with teens and kids with autism and tweens. And what would be the best way for me as a parent and caregiver
Mhm.
to be able to teach them about boundaries, personal boundaries, and boundaries that of respecting and honoring the boundaries of others?
By doing it, for one, that modeling piece is, I can tell you the reason that I have a really good relationship with boundaries is because my mother would take no prisoners when it came to boundary setting. It was like, you are on board or you're getting off, like those are your options. I'm not saying that you need to be in that exact place, but modeling it is tremendously helpful. I don't know where on the spectrum with autism your kids are, but I know that can be super tough because there's some of those cues that maybe they are unable to pick up on. But also having conversations with them kind of about what we've talked about here of, what do you need to feel safe in this space? How can I support you in feeling safe in this space? And helping them to voice like, oh yeah, I really need X, Y, or Z. And again, cognitively, that might be a little bit tough, but because I don't know where your kids are at. But as much as you can, really creating that space for them to be able to voice like, yeah, that made me really mad. And I felt unsafe because of this, can be a really good way to help them learn to identify those emotions and pinpoint how they can help themselves as they grow older.
Yeah, we have one that also is severe ODD.
Intensive therapy.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
We just started that. So
Yeah. That's going to be the big one there.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's the one that's the most rough when it comes to that.
Yep. Okay.
And I know that comes with the disability.
Mm-hmm. Gosh.
Doesn't make it easier. Doesn't make it any easier.
Mm-mm.
But understanding it at least makes it, I don't know what to call it.
It's tough. You have a lot on your plate for sure.
So
yeah.
So
Probably
ODD, I shouldn't expect boundaries from ODD, but I can explain it for the one that like the neurotypicals and the autistic.
Absolutely. And I think it's with the ODD for folks who don't, well, I don't, anyway, it's going to take some time. It's not that you can't expect it ever. It's that right now it's not happening. With the therapy and with your continuing to model and work with your other kids, at some point, I imagine that will start to show up for them as well.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's as late as 15 years?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Dr. Katherine, your info is in the chat. Thank you for that. So if we have questions afterwards, is it okay to reach out to you?
Absolutely. I'm super accessible via email. It's the best way to get in touch. I'm happy to talk with folks.
On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you so much for being here and teaching
Thank
us.
you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
And please, everybody, next month, we're continuing our right-sizing journey. We're going to talk about fostering resilience with Andrea Radu, and really excited to hear her come speak to us as well.
Oh, before we close, can I ask a question? I went on Google and I couldn't find it, so that's why I want to ask. What is ODD? I heard of ADD, but not ODD.
Oppositional defiance disorder.
Thank you very much.
Good question.
And it is exactly what those words are, combined in with the hormone teenage years. He's my fun child.
Oh, goodness.
Thank you for clarifying. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Judy. And just
I forget that people don't know what it is, and people have even heard of OCD.
Oh yeah,
they get that confused a lot too. And
yeah,
that's okay. And just remember, everybody, that we have each other as a resource. So we have a private Facebook group for our right sizing journey. So if you ever want to, share, maybe you're experimenting with boundaries this month and you want to share how that goes with us, that would be awesome. Thank you again, Dr. Katherine. We're so grateful that you were here with us today.
No, it's such a pleasure. Happy to share. Thanks, Whitney.
Thank you.